Here's a man who's held every position of note at the university, save for head football coach. So he's been a mentor to me since I returned back to UT Austin in the fall of 2014, and I really appreciate your mentorship. Great to be here with you. A couple of things. One, we will have time for question and answer. I do not believe in death by PowerPoint, so I am not going to inundate you with a lot of slides. I want to tell a few stories, but I want to talk about how we can translate some of the leadership lessons and management lessons from the NFL over into the private sector and the other areas of our economy. So you heard most of this. Grew up in Mount Pleasant, Texas. Population 12,291. So I come to Texas in 1997. The University of Texas student body is 4 times the size of my hometown. I'm a Plan 2 government major, and I walk on the campus, and I am completely floored. So, has anyone been to East Texas? Has anyone had the good fortune of being? Yes, that's good. I always have to check to see how many folks, there's this Houston-Dallas mafia. Whenever I teach classes, the first thing I do is try to figure out how many folks are from Houston and Dallas and make sure the ratio is right. So I'm glad to see that some of you have been to East Texas. I get to the University of Texas. First, I wasn't coming here. I was going to Stanford. I meet a man by the name of Lowell Leberman on a trip here. He shakes my hand. He says, "You're coming to UT." And I said, "Oh, thank you. I didn't know that." He said, "What do you want to do in life?" I said, "I want to be the governor of the state of Texas." He said, "Great. You're coming here for undergrad. You can go anywhere you want to for law school." And for some reason, I'd already accepted, put the deposit down at Stanford. For some reason, I went back to Mount Pleasant. I called Stanford up on Monday, declined the offer, and came to UT Austin. And I think that episode, he became a mentor of mine throughout that period. I think that episode really underscores the value of having people to invest not just time and effort, but also their expertise and their wisdom. I get here, everything that I'm doing is aimed at becoming the governor of the state by 40. I'm in student government. I'm a member of the Texas Cowboys. I served as student body president my last year. I think I'm on the track. I go to work for Joe Lieberman. It's May of 2001. I start working on education bills. September 11th, I start working on national security bills. I spend a year there. I think, okay, now it's time to go and get a degree somewhere. I go to the Kennedy School of Government. This is where the interest in politics start to wane a little bit, okay? So I'm sitting in classes, and we're discussing the world's problems and without determining any solutions. And I'm like, wow, wait, now hold on now. Why did I want to go into public office again? I'm not quite sure. But at this point in my life, I'm still very risk averse. So I do what a lot of talented people do when they don't know what to do. I go to law school. Go back to school. So now I've racked up close to $120,000 worth of debt. And I am sitting in a class. So in my class, my section alone, I have a former Miss America, I've got a Navy SEAL, former SEAL, I have a couple of surgeons. And I'm enjoying the experience, and I start to clerk at firms throughout the summer. And how many lawyers do we have in the audience? Okay, yeah. Just one. They let you out, huh? Okay, that's nice. That's nice. They're somewhere building right now. So here's what happens. I work at a firm, and I won't mention the name, and I go to my first lunch with this partner, and it looked like he was having the worst time of his life. And I thought, is it me? You know, I thought the conversation was pretty good, and we started talking, and I said, so what's the best part of your job? And there was just silence. So I start to think, maybe I'm in the wrong business. A buddy of mine calls me up, and he says, hey, he's coaching at Pflugerville High School. We played high school football together. He calls me up and he says, okay, let's go to South Carolina. We haven't talked in a while. I'm going to work the Steve Spurrier football camp. I said, that's great. Let's go. I get in the car. We go to South Carolina. I'm sitting in the back of the room. I'm kind of going through my BlackBerry. I had a BlackBerry at the time, I know. It doesn't really exist anymore. So I'm going through my phone. Steve Spurrier comes in. He says, hey, we're missing a coach. Can anyone step in and coach defensive backs, 6th graders? So I'm in the back of the room. I'm a 5th generation East Texan. I was first team all district. At my height, I was about 5'10", 165 pounds, so I didn't get any Division I offers, obviously. But I'm a 5th generation East Texan, so I raised my hand. I say, sure. He said, you, all right, where do you coach? I said, Mount Pleasant High School. I said, great, what's your name? Daron Roberts, good. You've got Group 7. Group 7 consists of 100 6th graders from across the country. All of them think that they are the next Deion Sanders. None of them are right. Okay? None of them are right. So this is a camp where you have to pay around $120 to be a part of the camp. If you're paying to participate in the camp, it's rule number 1. I found this out later. If you're paying to participate at a Division I football camp, you are not a recruit. You're not a recruit. So I'm teaching these kids, I'm doing my best to teach these kids how to backpedal and turn it 90 degrees and 45 degrees. And for the first time in my life, I am not having to set the alarm clock at night. It was the best 48 hours of my life. So I called my parents before I board the plane to Boston, and I tell my mom, I say, I want to be a football coach. Silence. She says, that's great, honey. That is wonderful. Is Vincent and Elkins going to let you take that on as a pro bono project? Is that? I said, no, I think I'm going to turn down the offer to V&E. Pause. She said, let me get your dad. Dad jumps on the phone. So, Gwen Roberts, elementary school principal. Kurt Roberts, Baptist minister. My dad says, you know, the deal was always that we were going to pay for undergrad, but the loans to law school and the Kennedy School are in your name. I said, yes, I understand that. Bank of America does a great job of reminding me every month that the clock will start ticking as soon as I get that degree, and I'll have 6 months before they own my life. She said, they both said, okay, we're praying for you, and they hung up the phone. And great endorsement. I write a letter to every team in the NFL. The rejections start coming in, they're rolling in. Belichick, Dungy, I start plastering them up in my apartment. Finally get a call from Herm Edwards of the Kansas City Chiefs. He's the head coach at the time. He calls me up and he says, I have one question for you. What's wrong? I said, what do you mean? He said, I'm looking at this resume. Doesn't it make sense? He said, you understand that if you come to work for us during training camp, you will see 18-hour days, no pay, and no benefits. I said, great. That's exactly what I was looking for. He said, okay, be here for the first day of training camp. I graduate in June of 2017. I'm in Kansas City in 2007. I get there in July. So my job, I'm just generally the grunt. I'm not on a website. Okay, I don't have an ID to get into the building, so I have to find someone, kind of trail behind them. I pick up guys from the airport. I drop them off at the airport. If we cut a player, I help to box up their items. I take it to UPS to ship home. Okay, I pick up cones at practice. I put out cones at practice. It was the best time of my life. It truly was. For the first time in my life, the stimulation was at an all-time high. And so I sat in the back of the room in defensive meetings, in head coaches meetings, and I just wrote. And I told Herm, I said, listen, I played high school football, but there's a lot about this game that I need to learn. I'm just here to learn. And I volunteered for the entire season. I bought a Coleman twin mattress from Academy, and I slept at Arrowhead Stadium 4 nights out of every week. My thing was this: I needed to be up at 4:30. I needed to be the first guy that Gunther Cunningham saw when he walked into the office. And if I wasn't, then I wasn't going to get an invitation to come back. So I volunteered for an entire season. At the end of that season, our record is 2-14. For all of you mathematicians out there, that is sub 500, and that will get you fired. Herm fires half of the staff. So I'm seeing this parade of coaches walk into his office, and then I see the security guards come out with dollies, and they're walking out. I'm like, oh man, this is not a good deal. Secretary comes to me, and she says, Daron, Coach Edwards would like to see you. So I get up, and I'm thinking to myself, well, technically, I can't get fired. Right? So there's nothing but upside in this deal, right? There's nothing but upside. I can't get fired. Let's just see how this thing goes. I sit down, and the conversation begins like so many rejection letters that you get. We really appreciate your application. He says, well, I really appreciate the time that you've put into this endeavor. Obviously, the season didn't go as well as we would have liked. And he slides a piece of paper across the table, and he says, welcome to the NFL. Here's your coaching contract. So I keep my game face on. Thank you very much, sir. Let me just review the terms, play the whole lawyer bit. Walk out, and I break down. Go to the bathroom. I break down. I'm crying. I'm calling mama. I'm calling dad. I'm taking pictures of the contract just in case they try to say, pull it at the last minute. I have something here. And I coach for the rest of the year. We go 4-12. So then we're all getting fired. And this is how I land in Detroit. Destination city for all of us. I get to Detroit. Detroit has just completed an 0-16 season, the only winless season in the history of the National Football League. Jimmy Schwartz has taken the helm as the head coach, and I travel with my defensive coordinator. I'm the assistant DB's coach, and we're there for 2 years. When I leave, I don't want you to think that my presence means that a team's going to go sub 500, okay? There are other factors in the building. But we do go 2-14, but then we go 6-10, and I get an opportunity to go to West Virginia, Morgantown. So now my wife's like, wow, we picked some great cities. We've got Detroit and then Morgantown. I see the college game. We're going to talk about this a little bit. I see the college game, and this is interesting. So I go from, in the NFL, once you leave the office, you cut your phone off. You're done. Anything that happens after hours, there is a collective bargaining agreement and a general manager to handle it. Not so much in college. You got to make sure Jimmy's going to chemistry class, right? You got to make sure that so-and-so is turning in a paper. I spent 2 years in college, and it really gave me a sense of this entire pipeline from high school and recruiting. I had Dallas, I had East Texas, I had Maryland and Virginia. And so I would sit on the couches of kids who everyone was going to the NFL. They're all going to be a first-round draft pick. And then I would coach them at West Virginia, and I started to think that there's a gap somewhere. We're not helping them get to reality early enough in their lives. Go to Cleveland. Go to the Browns. I get fired at West Virginia. We didn't do too well. I get fired. There's a trend here. It happens. Go to Cleveland. Sign a 2-year deal. At the end of the season, our record, anyone want to guess? 4-12. Owner walks in, Jimmy Haslam walks in the day after the last game of the season. He said, I understand that most of you, all of you, have signed multi-year deals. You're free to look for work. I'm firing all of you. Gets up and walks out. Lesson here, become the owner, right? I go home and I'm scrambling eggs. My 3-year-old walks in, looks at me. Dylan says, you eat breakfast. And goes to sit down. So I just keep scrambling. And then I said, wait, what did you say? He said, you eat breakfast? So then it hit me. So I break down again. So it hits me that I'm spending 16 hours a day with other people's sons. My own son has never seen me eat breakfast because I'm gone by 4:30. I'm gone by 4:30. I'm home on a good night, 10:30 or 11. I'm sleeping at the office twice a week. Home games, away games, I'm at the team hotel on the weekends. And that's when I decide that I'm going to take a sabbatical from coaching, come back to the University of Texas and teach a course on leadership in sports. I get here, the Ray Rice episode unfolds. Commissioner Goodell comes into town to meet with Coach Strong, and he invites me to that meeting, and I'm listening to both men talk about the fact that we need to do more for athletes in high school and middle school and elementary school, because by the time they get to the NFL, so many of their value systems are entrenched. So President Powers and I have a discussion, and I create the Center for Sports Leadership and Innovation. Among the things we do, we teach a mandatory 3-hour course for all of our freshman athletes. Half of it's devoted to leadership, half of it's devoted to financial management. We train coaches, so we have Lil Anderson here, athletic director from AISD. We brought 100 captains from AISD to campus 2 weeks ago, and we begin the process of leadership training, vulnerability and empathy, all right? Decision making, value setting, coalition building, and effective communication. So this is our way, the University of Texas's way of really trying to reach back and impact student athletes, and not just the ones that we're going to see on Saturdays and Sundays and Mondays, but really influence them beyond the game. All right, let's get to it. Anybody know this guy? Vince Lombardi, Vince Lombardi, Vince Lombardi. First lesson. What's the famous play that Vince Lombardi instituted with the Green Bay Packers? Anyone know? This is my crowd. Packer sweep. Yeah, Packer sweep, right? Packer sweep, Packer sweep, Packer sweep. So when Vince Lombardi gets to Green Bay, he has a meeting and he determines, he says, you know what? We need a go-to play. So this is around the time of the NFL where there's a proliferation in play calling, so people are really trying to advance the game. It's similar to what we're seeing now with analytics. So as more information is becoming available, right, with formations and who's on the field, what player tendencies are, coaches are starting to complicate the game. And Lombardi comes in and he says, you know what we're going to do is we're going to determine what our go-to play is, and it's called Packer sweep, and that's what we're going to do. And there's a great quote from a player on the team that says, the thing about Packer sweep was this: we knew we were running it, they knew we were running it, and they knew they couldn't stop it. This is something that I see, especially in the private sector, and it's what we call mission creep, all right? Mission creep. So it's very easy as you start to get good at a certain practice, to start to think that, well, maybe we're good at also doing this. We're at a nonprofit. We take at-risk youth and we give them SAT prep, life skills, and football training. Started becoming very successful, all right? 93% placement rate in college. Then other nonprofits would come to us and say, hey, well, could you also, everyone, oh, that's a nice ringer. So everyone would come to us and say, well, could you also do this? Could you start a writing clinic? And of course we said, yeah, right, because you got all this great data and the numbers look great. And then you start to find out that this mission begins to grow and grow and grow. And then you're sitting in the board meeting, you wonder, now what are we here to do again? Right? No, we run a camp. Same thing in the private sector. What oftentimes happens is that we become enamored with options, right, and with propositions and value propositions that we don't remember at the core, what is it that we are good at? Whether it's a nonprofit or a church or a professor or an educational enterprise, you've got to figure out what is it that I'm good at and how do I create that as my go-to? I have to have a go-to. And I think that Vince Lombardi, of all the coaches that I've studied, and my wife will tell you, we just moved, and I caught her trying to throw a couple of my boxes of books away. I study NFL coaches probably more than I should, I will say that. And of all the coaches that I've studied, Vince Lombardi was the best at really simplifying the game and saying, we're going to do this. We're going to practice this play more than any other play that we run. We're going to run this play more than any other play. and we're going to be successful at it. Who's this guy? Bill Walsh. Bill Walsh. Godfather of the West Coast offense. There we go. Here we go. All right. West Coast offense. Bill Walsh, as an offensive coordinator, determined that there was something wrong. So this is the life of an NFL coach. You play on Sundays, and you spend Monday through Saturday normally trying to outsmart yourself, okay? So you play all the contingencies. Well, what happens if we come out and they're in a 4-3 defense? Okay, we're going to run these plays. Well, what happens if it starts to snow in the second half and we're coming out of the east and we're on the 10-yard line, and you run all of these scenarios, and it gets to be very complicated. Bill Walsh created the system of scripting. So this is what he did. He said, you know, I am going to determine what 25 plays we're going to run at kickoff. I don't care what end zone we're coming out of. I don't care how we get the ball. I am going to script these 25 plays, and then throughout the week, all that we practice will be that script. So if you talk to a player on Bill Walsh's team and you ask them what play number 22 would be, they could tell you each week. Here's the other thing that he did that I think was pretty interesting. He would throw the entire playbook up on the whiteboard, and he would ask the players, he would say, what are we good at? So he would involve them in the process of determining what the script would be. And he understood this. Coaches are great. I mean, you don't know this, but I wasn't a great player. If I was a great player, I probably wouldn't be talking to you right now. But coaches are very good at sitting in offices and dark rooms where there isn't any contact, and everything looks really good when you're sitting in the room and you have this nice board and you're playing video. Things don't quite work out like you draw it up when there are 22 humans running at each other, right, at very fast speeds. And what he knew was that there was a certain perspective that players were getting on the ground level, in the trenches. Offensive linemen going against defensive linemen. Receivers going against defensive backs. There was a certain perspective that they were getting that he would never be privy to because he couldn't cross that white line during action. And so he would involve his players in the process of scripting those plays. Just like plays, I talk about days. You always hear, what's your first 100 days look like as a manager or a CEO or a president? I think we should scale that back to even say, what about just the first 25 days? Let me almost get to the end of the month. So before I take on this enterprise, before I assume this office, what are my priorities and how am I going to communicate those to my organization? Scripting is so important because you and I both know this. As soon as you assume the new role, everyone has an idea for what you should be doing, right? Everyone knows exactly what the number one issue is for your organization. And unless you take the time to script that in advance, then again, it's very easy for you to start to float and float and float, and then you forget, well, why are we here and what are we here to do? All right, who's this guy? Mr. Shoeless. So if I was on the heels of a team that had just gone 0-16, this is the only coach who led a undefeated team. And now some of you are going to say, wait, what about Belichick? That was the regular season. Won them all in one season, okay? So the only coach to go undefeated from beginning to end, not just the regular season. His mantra was this: we're going to act like a champion before we become one. Act like a champion before you become one. I find this interesting. So I'm teaching student athletes. I had a young man who's a football player, and I have a mandatory 15-minute meeting with each one of my players, I still call them players, each one of my students. We're sitting in the office, and he says to me, he says, you know, Professor Roberts, I feel like everyone just sees me as a football player. I said, okay. He says, I just don't know what it is. Now, he's 6'4", 270 pounds, so there's a piece of it, right? Probably. But I said to him, I said, you've been in class for 2 months now. I've only seen you in Nike sweats. So he looked at me. He said, I've only seen you in, and I'm an alum, got the ring, right? My initials are DKR. I bleed burnt orange and white. But I've only seen you in Nike Longhorn sweats, Nike top. I see the company, the team issued Nikes on the feet, right? I said, so when I see you, everything about you says athlete. I said, let's try something next week. So you have any jeans? Yes. Great. Good starting point. Next week, go the entire week to class in a jeans and shirt. I said, it doesn't have to be a button-up. I didn't know where he was coming from. I said, look, just go try jeans and shirt. I just want you to see if you get as many second looks. He comes in the following week. Kid almost broke down. I was almost breaking down. He's like, you know what? It was almost life-changing. He said, for the first time, I felt like I really blended into the University of Texas. Now, he's still tall and he still has a muscular frame. But he said, for the first time, I didn't get the second looks because people saw the swoosh and the shorts or the shirt that they knew that they couldn't get online. Right? Acting like a champion before you become one. This is what I say to people who are taking on new enterprises or making transitions. All of us know, and I'm at the ripe age of 37, I remember sitting in the back of the room thinking, wow, Coach Edwards really has it together. I mean, he doesn't skip a beat. Joe Lieberman, wow. I worked for Bill Ratliff in the Senate. I thought, wow, you know what? I mean, this guy doesn't mess up. He doesn't skip a beat. What you don't see, right, is when you're at home. I have 4 kids under the age of 5. You know, it's a challenge for me to make it out of my home with 2 shoes on, matching pants and socks. And so what you don't see is what's behind the scenes. You just see this kind of, this persona roll out when you see some of these politicians. Well, not probably in this. I won't go there. We don't have time for that. But what you don't see is all the hard work that goes on. You don't see all of the trials and tribulations behind the scenes. But they're very good at presenting a picture of this is who I'm going to be. And one thing that Coach Shoeless did was this. He sized the team up for championship rings. And he was taking over one of the worst teams in the league at the time. He had them all sized for the Super Bowl ring. All right? This is before we even get to the season. This is before training camp. And he knew that some of those players would be cut. He had them all sized up. He had them all sized up, and he said, I want you to understand and get the feel of what a Super Bowl ring will feel like on your fingers. All right? So act like a champion before you become one. All right. Who's this man? AKA the tuna. Parcells. Belichick is in the Parcells tree. Bill Parcells. Now, there are a lot of practices from Bill Parcells that you should not use in your company, organization, church, home, and I won't go into them now. One thing that you should mimic is his relentless pursuit of talent. So this is the man, and it's really, I think it's timely that we're having this discussion as the NFL Combine unfolds in Indianapolis. And I've been for the last 9 years. This is the man who really fine-tuned the way that NFL coaches evaluate talent. So before Bill Parcells, coaches would sort of show up after the season had ended. They would go to all the college campuses and kind of eyeball guys on the sideline. They would talk to other college coaches. Hey, this kid, Daron Roberts, do you think he can play? Yeah, I think he'd be a good fit. And you'd write a few reports, and that was it. Parcells creates 11 characteristics for a Parcells guy. All right, for a Parcells guy. At each position on the field, he had 5 distinct characteristics. So if he was evaluating a tight end, 5 specific characteristics from knee bend and hand placement and hand size. All right, if he's evaluating quarterbacks from foot movement and vision and decision making. So he found a way to really add a layer of detail to every single position on the field. So it didn't suffice that you were just a good football player or that you had been on a very successful team. You had to have measurable metrics, measurable characteristics at each position in order for Parcells to give you the look to get to the second round. Here's the next thing he would do. Every single day, whether it was in training camp or mini camp or the regular season, in the head coach's meeting, so he has 15 coaches, a coordinator for special teams, offense and defense, and then position coaches. He would go around the table and he would ask each coach, give me one player that we can cut in order to make this team better. Give me one player we can cut in order to make this team better. So here's what's happening. As a position coach, I'll kind of give you the pipeline of coaching. You started as a grunt. This is what I was in Kansas City. You're drinking Red Bull, and if someone says get up and hop, you do that. You're a quality control, you're at the grunt level. When you get to the position level, you are coaching 7 to 8 guys. You're coaching defensive backs, or you're coaching quarterbacks, or you're coaching defensive linemen. And all you do is you spend time with those 10 or 11 men. And you start to form relationships because you hear about the issues with child support and not being able to cover the mortgage or being on their 3rd deal or the ACL they're trying to hide from the surgeon. You hear all of it. And you get these relationships going. So what sometimes will happen is that the relationship starts to trump an honest evaluation of, can this young man help us to win football games? And it sounds crude, and at this level it is. At the NFL level, it's crude because you can only have 53 players on a roster, right? And you can only take 46 into a game. Now think about that. You can only take 46 guys into a game. And this isn't high school where you play multiple positions. You either play offense or defense. So you don't have a lot of room for dead weight. Parcells would force his coaches to always identify the weak link on the team. And then once they did, the guy was gone. The guy was gone. Now, again, this is tough to implement. I understand. But let's just talk about the practice. Surveying the decision makers in your organization, whether it's the head of marketing or whether it's your chief of staff, constantly surveying the managers in your organization to determine, how is so-and-so doing? Are there ways that we can get better through personnel? Right? Either should we spend the time to help develop this person, or is there someone else out there that maybe we've come into contact with or we've heard about who can help us to get better in a certain position? And this is a method that Parcells really honed. All right. This guy. Any Saints fans? We're in Texas. Sean Payton. Does anyone know what I may be alluding to here about a calculated risk, Sean Payton? What do you think? Onside kick. Onside kick. Who doesn't know what an onside kick is? It's okay. An onside kick. So, in football, you kick the ball. You've got 11 guys. We're going to kick the ball to the receiving team. And the rule is that the ball must go at least 10 yards. All right? Must go at least 10 yards before the kicking team can recover it. An onside kick, and there are 2 types. I'm not going to get too technical. An onside kick is when the kicking team kicks the ball with the intent of recovering it quickly. So we're not kicking it 40 yards deep. We're trying to get it. You can break the world of onside kicks down into just onside kicks where we're down by a lot of points. You know we're kicking it onside. They know, everybody knows in the building because we're down by 21 points. Then there's the old surprise onside kick. There is no indication on the scoreboard, on the sideline, that we're going to kick it. That we're going to kick an onside kick. Anyone remember what the score was to the game when he kicks it? So we're playing the Colts. Good old Payton Manning. I mean, I'll tell you what, this guy is timeless. All right? Saints versus Colts. Saints down 6-10 at halftime. 6-10 at halftime. Sean Payton, I wouldn't say he's an analytics guy like a Chip Kelly, but he understands the numbers. Can anyone guess what the success rate of surprise onside kicks is? What's the success rate? How many times would you say, percentage-wise, that a team recovers the ball when they're kicking it onside? 5%, okay. You want to take the over on 5? Over, what are we thinking? 25? 40? 19.7. 19.7. Again, for all you math majors, 1 out of every 5 times you're going to get it, right? So 20% chance you're going to get it. Saints come out, second half. And the interesting thing about Payton is when he talked about it in retrospect and the Saints go on to win, he had this vision prior to the game, so weeks before. And he kind of just kept it in the back of his mind. He said, it's kind of crazy because for a coach, I mean, this is something, if it doesn't go well, then all the pundits on Monday are going to tell you, how could he do it, right? It's like everyone knows that you shouldn't go on for it on 4th down on Monday, right? The beat writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer is all of a sudden, he's become a statistician, and he knows that you shouldn't have gone for it on 4th down, right? He just walks over to his special teams coach as they're taking the field, and he says, we're going to kick it onside. Surprise onside. They recover the ball, win the game. Now, what's the lesson here? The lesson here is this. There are times where you're going to have to take a calculated risk, right? Now, you can stay in the kind of the easy lane, put it in cruise control, and probably do okay as an organization, whether it's a church or whether it's a nonprofit or a startup. You could probably just put it in cruise and do okay. But as my dad would say whenever he would take me out for a game, nobody's here to do okay, right? Like James Harrison doesn't believe in participation awards. Anyone see the interesting Instagram post? Side note, so James Harrison, defensive end, Pittsburgh Steelers, his kid goes to some kind of sporting event, doesn't win the tournament, gets a participation trophy. James Harrison promptly returns this participation trophy. He says, hey, listen, we don't get points for showing up. It's true, right? You all remember the green ribbons you used to get? Who cares about a green ribbon? So if we're here to win at the end of the day, you're going to have to take a calculated risk because we're trying to get upside. Doesn't mean that you every single day, and I say calculated risk, right? But if you see that the factors are in your favor and you believe in your personnel and you think that you have the management in place to execute it, then it's to your benefit to take a calculated risk. All right? It is 12:22. It's 12:22. Any questions? Yes, sir.
How do you work to implement some of these strategies in your own life?
How do I work? Question was from Donald. Donald's one of our CSLI fellows. Donald asked, how do I work to implement some of these strategies in my own life? A couple of things. So the older I get, the more I understand that I have to be very intentional because I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old and an 8-month-old in my house. My wife is a saint, but we both work. And so I have to be very intentional about my day. I script out from beginning to end my entire day, and I color code all of my activities, right? School gets a code. My family gets a code. And I reevaluate each Sunday. My wife knows I'm at Starbucks for 2 hours every Sunday. I go back and look at the previous week and I say, okay, I spent too much time working in this area. I need to readjust for this week. So I'm constantly running analytics on my own activities. The second thing is this. I talk to myself on a daily basis. So I have a set of dry erase markers on my side of the bathroom, okay? Make that clear, because there's been some disputes in my home about this. On my side, okay, on the vanity. And every Sunday I write the 3 things that week for me, what are the 3 things that I have to get, when I get down to Saturday, these are the 3 things I need to achieve. And then I have my word for the year is gratitude. My word for the year is gratitude. So that doesn't change. It's at the top. But I just found that there are so many people, there's so many experts who know exactly what I should be doing and when I should be doing it. And there are also so many negative influences that come into your life. I spend the first 30 to 45 minutes of my mornings preaching to myself. Every morning. You're going to be the best professor at the University of Texas today. Oh, I'll tell you what, this presentation in your speech class, just did one on JFK's speech at Rice. We choose to go to the moon. I put 5 hours. I said, this is going to be the best. I tell you what, this is going to be one for the ages, Daron, right? So I'm constantly telling, because you need to do it. You have to do it. And I used to think that it was just, it's kind of corny and something that the yogis would do, and I'm not sure if that's for me. You have to be intentional about kind of pushing yourself up. That's me. Yes, sir.
Michael Lewis, I appreciate your presentation. In 2007, when you started with the Chiefs, did you think you would be where you at right now?
Michael Lewis, famous name. Michael Lewis.
Yes, sir.
When I started with the Chiefs in 2007, I don't know what I thought, to be honest with you. I was driving to Kansas City in my 2002 Tahoe. Elena Kagan had handed my law degree to me. And I walked off the stage and I had a conversation with her. I went to her for advice. I said, Dean Kagan, I'm thinking about going to coach football. She kind of she said, well, Daron, when I hand that law degree to you, the one thing that won't be on it is an expiration date. And that really stuck with me. She said, the one thing you can rest assured that legal problems will not disappear during your time in the NFL. And that provided some solace. When I thought that I was going to become a head coach. That was my goal, to become a head football coach. But I also knew that I'd love to teach and I love to write. And I didn't quite know how that would fit in. But the one thing I've learned, I make all of my students and all of my classes watch Steve Jobs' speech to Stanford University, the commencement address, 2005. It's just over 29 minutes. And the key takeaway in there for me is you can only connect the dots going backwards. I thought that I knew if A then B, if B then C, if C then D, if E then governor's mansion at 40. Life doesn't work that way, right? You get to B, it's a dead end, you can't find C. I say life is like shopping at IKEA. Right? Everything looks so good on the showroom floor. They've got the impressionist art. You're like, yeah, I'll take that. And then you get home and you don't have a screwdriver and you've got this thing that looks okay, but then you have 4 spare parts on the ground, right? And you're like, well, it's standing up, so you kind of just put that to the side. That's life. And it's taken me a while, but I have grown a comfort level with discomfort.
Is it any easier 9 years later?
What makes it easy for me, a couple of things. One, my faith. My wife, this woman, she's a KU grad, so as a side note, we're going to the game on Monday. She's got 2 degrees from KU, and so we always joke that I've got football season, that's my time, she gets basketball season. But then her joke to me now is I can't even have football season anymore. I don't like that. She and I made an agreement that all of our pursuits, she does photography and she works for a nonprofit, and mine, that we would just find a way to fit it in, and that the kids would never be a secondary matter. So I take my kids to eat donuts every Saturday, donut council. We've been to 27 different places. We've got T-shirts. And you know what? I've learned just to hit the off switch and to really script it out so that I'm not constantly thinking, oh, I could be doing this, I could be doing that. So a wonderful mate has made it easy. Easy. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Shane Walsh.
Any relation?
No.
A couple back?
No, I'm like you. I wouldn't be here. So it's always fascinated me moving into the NFL from a college coaching job, because you suddenly, you're going from coaching a group of young men who are, for all practical purposes, not paid, to coaching a group of young men that make, 5, 10, 100 times more than you do, and who very often have very different motivations that you do, different goals that are sometimes, maybe even often, in direct opposition to what the coaching staff is trying to achieve, partially because of their background, partially because of their financial status. They just have more options. And so my question is, how have you seen, both in the NFL and then in the private sector, working with a group of people where the management team and the motivations of the management team and the motivations of the group of people that they are managing are in direct opposition to one another?
All right, Detroit Lions, 2009. We get there, 0-16 season. The first thing that Jimmy Schwartz does is he goes around the building, head coach of the Lions, walks around, starts taking down pictures, takes down all the motivational quotes. He puts up one sign: hope is not a strategy. We sit in our first meeting. He said, men, we have 53 guys on the roster. Only one player is safe. His name is Calvin Johnson. He said, there's one guy that's safe in this building. Everyone's up on the chopping block. Go watch the film and figure out they should be here. We met with every single player. And he said, I want you to meet with them, and I want you to determine whether or not you believe that they're going to be on board with what we are trying to do, which essentially is taking the worst team in the history of the NFL and get them to the playoffs. We fired 25 guys that year on the team. There were parts of the building, a couple of departments, where we had to completely gut the departments because they had been on the team for so long around a losing environment that they couldn't even really, the thought of winning, this is Detroit, right? The thought of winning as a Detroit Lion, it sounded good, but we could start to tell that that sounded good, but in reality, they weren't willing to do the work to get there. I think that honesty at the end of the day, I think people want to know where they stand. And I think that the organizations where I've been where it hasn't gone well is that the manager hasn't been willing to say, this is not working. This is my perception of what's going wrong. How can we fix it? And then to become kind of a partner with the person and saying, okay, this is how we can kind of craft a solution. They've just kind of gone along and said, oh, it'll get better. I've just found out things just don't get better. They never do, right? Oh, she'll do better. No, you have to have a conversation and kind of put steps into place to get that person better because, my grandmother would always say, at some point you have to put some feet on your prayers. Things just don't happen. And so having those tough conversations to say, listen, this division is not performing as well as we want it to. What are the steps that we're going to take to get it back on track? And then, are you willing to take those steps? And then come back 6 months later and say, okay, we determined this. This is what I'm seeing. It's probably best that we move in a different direction. The NFL is, if your unit isn't performing, you're gone, right? Defensive backs, if you are giving up more touchdowns than any other unit, you can rest assured after the last game, go ahead and pack up your boxes, print out and update your resume. It's time to move to the next city. Things happen at a rapid pace because Owners aren't willing to give head coaches, a lot of leeway. So I think it's all about honesty and having hard conversations, and then accountability to say, at the 3-month mark, 6-month mark, 1-year mark, where are we? Any questions? Yes, sir.
Paul Linkman, Chief Compliance Officer here at the university and lifelong Patriots fan.
Oh.
So I want to talk about playing by the rules. Can you talk about it in a high stakes, win at all cost environment? How do you embed the value of, I think, the idea that winning without integrity is not really winning at all?
Paul. It's tough, right? So the average margin of victory in the NFL is around 6 points. That's nothing. That's razor thin. And it's hard to really articulate, but when you're sitting in a meeting room where you have a guy who's 31 and he just needs 1 more year, right? He bought mama the house when he graduated from college, and he's got 2 houses and a few kids, and he's had a couple of ACL surgeries. He's just trying to get 1 more year. You see to where some of the people start cutting corners. And I'll just mention this, concussion protocol. Players are now becoming smarter at understanding, okay, I may have just had a concussion. How should I act? Can I override my body's natural instinct to act a certain way because I know that there are some physicians who are watching my every movement, and this could mean that I can no longer play in this game, or maybe for the entire season. It's tough, and I'll tell you this. I don't have a good answer for it. You've got 53 personalities. You have to have someone at the top who continuously talks about being a team of high moral character. But you also know, listen, if you had 53 kids, I'm not saying they're kids, right? But let's say you had 53 people under your control. Some bad things are going to happen, right? I'm not condoning it, but just the numbers alone, some bad things are going to happen. The problem is, do you start to recruit a critical mass of those players who act a certain way? That's where teams get into trouble. On-field talent starts to trump character. And once the culture gets... The hardest thing, as we all know, is to change the culture. And once people in the locker room say, well, you've got so-and-so on the team. Now, we have all these PSAs that we play at halftime, but you're still letting so-and-so sit in the locker room. And they know what the incidents are. It has to come from the top. And I think you have to make the tough choices to say, we could probably win more games with you, but it's not worth compromising our integrity and the value of our organization. It's tough. Any other questions?
I'm David Borland. I work here at the university. Like a lot of us, I've seen many times Vince Lombardi. I've read some of his books. And he was a guy that could throw a fit, but it was based on his principles. I think a lot of us have, in the last 6 months, there was an article about a quarter of CEOs are borderline psychotic. So we've probably all been in those rooms with guys that would throw a fit, and we don't know what it's based on. And I have wondered, are we, there are so many books on leadership. When are we going to start talking about followership and what we will put up with and what we won't?
So I'll tell you this, 10 years ago, if you had mentioned the terms vulnerability and empathy to me, I would have laughed at you and turned back to my computer and kept watching film. Brene Brown, second most viewed TED Talk, around 30 million hits, professor at the University of Houston. Watch it. Just watch it. I'm not going to say if you get a chance. I mean, here's what I know, right? You're all busy people. Whenever I say things in class, I say, I know the research says that 10% of you may watch this thing, and I'm hoping you 10% do. Watch the video on vulnerability and empathy. I really think that's where it starts. we've always talked about leadership from the perspective of this outward coalition building and strategy and all the things that sound good in an MBA curriculum. How do you empathize with someone in the organization who may be having issues away from work? How does a leader show vulnerability and endear him or herself to the rest of the organization? I think those are the kinds of concepts that we need to teach more. It can't begin with, you just look at the first year MBA curriculum. I know there are some leadership components, but we really have to start thinking about how can we connect more with others, because I think that gets to, I think that would help to alleviate a lot of the leadership issues that we have. Vulnerability and empathy. Yes, ma'am.
Do you think that's what Charlie Strong is doing now? He's changing the culture?
I should probably read a disclaimer right now. What was your name?
Paulette Fresh, I'm sorry.
Colin?
Paulette.
Paulette, I'm sorry. Paulette Fresh said, do I think that Charlie Strong is changing the culture? Yes.
But I think he's trumping the character over the talent in some cases.
And Paulette, I'm going to say the disclaimer, I can't speak to what happens within the locker room. That's the one thing that I've learned too. It gets tough from the out. You don't see what's happening inside. And I think that he has a very clear understanding of where he sees that team going and what he believes in. But that's all we know. You kind of, I told my son, I said, one of the best things you can learn is to tell people that what you don't know. And I didn't learn that until last year, right? Seriously. Plan 2 grad, went to Harvard, everyone has answers, and then you start realizing, you start going back to some of these meeting notes, and you think, this wasn't right. What are we? She didn't know that, or he didn't know that, but it just sounds good. You don't know what happens in the locker room, but it seems like that's what's going on. Yes, sir. Willie Beeman.
And the young athletes struggled with history. Willie struggled with history. And then he couldn't build a team around him because he struggled with history and didn't respect history. Do you find in 2015, as is even a mention of Charlie Strong or the mention of all of the coaches, how does history play in teaching leadership as a contact sport? Because leadership is, we live in a PlayStation world until you go on the battlefield, and then you really realize what battle is. How does leadership and history play into learning how to lead going on a football field?
So people,
or anywhere else.
The one thing that I've said, and I was at a kind of spending the day with a company, and we're talking, and a guy made the remark that it's good for his son to play sports, and I said, oh, well, why do you think that? And he said, well, it's just sports, they're a good thing. And I've changed. I used to believe that. I don't think that sport is inherently good. I think it's only good if you have conscious men and women at the helm who are there to teach lessons. Because there are a lot of team environments, and I've seen all of the helicopter parents. Now, in West Virginia, I had so many parents, I would have to kind of look outside of my window and cut the lights on, and because parents would say, well, why aren't you giving Jimmy a Division I scholarship? I said, well, I don't think Jimmy can play here. Well, so-and-so offered a scholarship. I said, well, by all means, he should go to Cincinnati, but I just don't see it. Well, I don't understand. We paid $180 for this camp. I said, well, aha, there's the issue. in terms of history, I think you need coaches at the top. Herm Edwards every day would say, respect the shield, respect the shield. And he would say, you will always take the name that we put on the back of your jersey with you. And he said, but he would always say, hey, you know, we had Tony Gonzalez, who will eventually go into the Hall of Fame. He says, Tony Gonzalez, he's the only player in this locker room whose nameplate doesn't have screws in it. I looked around, I said, I never noticed that. Right? I went around the entire, and all of the other names had screws. Why? Because we cut a guy and changed it out. So I think coaches at the top who are willing to teach history and engender an appreciation for history is what's needed. But let's be honest, we're in a Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, and I'm on all of those. I'm on all of those. Okay? I'm on all of those. I'm on Snapchat, but I've never used it. I don't know what I'm doing. But it's all about tweeting how much, you know, I'm grinding, I'm out, I'm getting it, I'm going for the gusto, and I'm doing this. And, you know, there aren't any group tweets about we're one or we're fortunate to be playing this game because there were players back in the 60s who integrated the sport for us. So I think coaches have to do it. They have to lead the charge. Yes, sir.
Lance Aldridge with the Austin Sports Commission. Kind of along those lines and continuing with Shane's question, but in theory, it's a little generalized, but we know that collegiate athletes play for the name on the front of the jersey. Professional athletes play, you know, largely for the name on the back of the jersey. How did you, as a leader of both, and kind of along the lines of the empathy that you talked about, how did you find your leadership skills transitioning from an NFL locker room to a collegiate locker room working with kids that are in large part going to be there for 5 years? So
Lance Aldridge, chairman of the Austin Sports Commission, I'm fortunate to sit on the board with him. No. I paid him to say that. When I left Detroit and I took the first position with West Virginia, I noticed that, you know, we would recruit 200 young men. We'd only take 25. And I started to overhear some conversations between some of our coaches and recruits. And I think to myself, that's not right. I just sat in a meeting where we said that kid's the fourth target. We're going to only take this quarterback if the other three turn us down. He's number 4. But on the phone, the coach is saying, hey, man, you're our guy. Hey, you're taking it. Listen, we need you on this team. You're our guy. And I thought to myself, that doesn't seem right, because this young man is 17 or 18 years old, and he's making a life-changing decision. And he may come here thinking that he's going to start on day one, which you've told him and you've lied to him. And we know that if he starts, we're in trouble. Absolutely, right? So that's where I think coaching in the NFL helped me. I just decided to be honest with kids. I sat on the couch of a kid, and kid had an offer to go to a better school. Not a better football school, a better school. And we had just finished a nice meal, and the young man kind of leaves the room, and mom turns to me and she says, if he were your son, where would you tell him to go? And I told her to go to the other school. He was not. Well, he actually was, and it was a weird visit, but college recruiting is a different story. He didn't hear this part. But I know how, for me, going from Mount Pleasant, Texas to the University of Texas multiplied and expanded my worldview. It was like from here to here, right? And this kid that we were recruiting, he would not play on Sundays in the NFL, no matter how many weights he lifted and how many 40s he ran. It was better for him to go to a place with a better academic reputation than it was to come to West Virginia. And, you know, my coach and I, we had some discussions down the road, because he's like, listen, my job is to get kids to play for West Virginia. And I was recruiter of the year my first year. And I said, I'm just going to be honest with them. And I found more mamas said, you know what, we appreciate it. And I also knew that if I had that reputation, mamas talk to other mamas. And the kid that we really wanted, we would get eventually. So I think the one good aspect of the NFL is that because there's not as much latitude, you have to be honest right now because we got to play in 2 days, and if we don't get better, we're going to get fired tomorrow. You have to be honest now. I think taking that practice with me to college was good for me and for the guys that I recruited and coached. Yes, sir.
So this is kind of a follow-up to our Patriots fan over here, and I'm going to use this young lady's Charlie Strong example. So I like to think of myself, I'm a season ticket holder for University of Texas, been one for 35 years, sit right below Frank Denius, so I'm invested. I like to think that, I've been a big proponent of Charlie, I like to think that I would rather us go 8-4 with young men on the football team of high integrity than go 12-0, win the national championship with men and boys that were not. But I think that's kind of a minority viewpoint, and I even wonder if, in practice, if I would feel that way if it actually happened. So I'm questioning my own integrity as well about that, my own character. So what do you think we can all do, as whether we're in business or whether we're football fans, which is an easy example, to keep us from pressuring leaders to not be at the helm and do it properly, as you said a minute ago, but to go out and do it all for the big win, because we are all people of integrity when we're sitting in our homes, our doors closed, but all of a sudden when we're football fans, now we don't really care as long as we win.
What's your name again? Remind me. Greg. So Greg's question is related to how can fans help coaches and programs do it the right way? What's the best way to support them? So in one of my classes, there's a Harvard Business School case study that compares Coach Krzyzewski to Coach Knight, Bobby Knight. Two very different coaching styles, okay? And I take that case study, and then we also read a chapter out of Machiavelli's The Prince and the chapter related to whether or not it's better to be loved or feared. And we start talking. I showed them clips of Coach K at halftime, Coach Knight at halftime, two very different volumes, two very different vocabularies being used. Coach Krzyzewski is the head coach at Duke. Coach Knight was mainly with the Indiana Hoosiers and ended up in Texas Tech, but a lot of profanity, loud talking. And what's interesting is Coach K played for Coach Knight at Army. Okay, that's the point. But his philosophy on how to coach, he always believes this. He says, if I can get them to be better men, we'll win games. He's like, the buckets will follow. Shaka Smart is that man. He says, listen, my job is to make these young men become the best version of themselves. After that, the three-pointers and the fast breaks, that will happen. But I can't do that until I transform the way that they think about themselves. I think as fans, you got to support men and women who believe that. The Karen Astons of the world, the Charlie Strongs. The men and women who are putting that philosophy out into the marketplace, because it's not the dominant view. You can look at a lot of national champions in football the last 10 years and look at their programs and the incidents they've had. There have been some hard decisions that have been made in other places to go a different route. Eventually wins come. I just believe this because I know this. From sitting down with young men in meeting rooms for 7 years, they just want to know that someone's invested in them beyond the field, beyond their 40-yard dash time or their vertical leap. If you can genuinely show that you're invested in them beyond the field, then they'll play for you. And as fans, we have to get off the message boards, get off of Orange Bloods and Burn Orange Nation and everything that comes out, just jump on it. We've got to just let them coach and let them play. That's what I think. Thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Alan Grant from the NFL, the College Outreach Program. The issue of diversity is a pretty hot topic right now, as you know. And the NFL has the Rooney Rule. I was wondering, do you think that's something that's applicable to the corporate world? That's a hot conversation.
Rooney Rule.
Right,
it's interesting because I just saw a report. It's kind of been mixed results, but a lot of the data suggests that the Rooney Rule has not increased the numbers of African American coaches in the NFL. I think it's a good thing, and I think it's a good thing that Chancellor McRaven instituted the kind of quasi-Rooney Rule here in the UT system. Here's why. It exposes management teams to candidates that they would not normally consider. Right? So there's a great story about Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin, currently the head coach with the Pittsburgh Steelers, was a defensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings, and gets an interview and doesn't get it, but the word gets out that this is the guy, right? In the coaching world, like when people say, hey, you're the guy, that means you're the guy, okay? And so when the Pittsburgh Steelers job opens up, the Rooney family hire Mike Tomlin on the spot. It's it. That was their guy. But they learned that from an interview and a job that he didn't get. So I think just ensuring that at least you have one. And I understand that a lot of organizations just do it to kind of tick off the box and keep on, and they're going to hire who they're going to hire. But I think just getting those names and faces in front of managers is always a good thing. Because I know this just from my own hiring process, and a lot of the research shows that we don't really know what we know. There's some great behavioral science research now that shows that what we think we perceive and what we think we know, the level of certainty is really minuscule. And so the more that we can expose ourselves to new people and new faces and give ourselves the opportunity to have our misconceptions challenged, I think is a good thing. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Catherine Campbell with Texas Athletics. Actually, the man that made the onside kick, Thomas Morstead, is a friend of mine from SMU.
Did you coach him up on that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, nice.
Of course. And we were part of a leadership organization at SMU where we talked a lot about life skills for student athletes. So I thank you for doing everything you've done for Texas, and we feel very blessed to have you. My question is, do you see a national push around the country at other schools, you identifying this need for student athletes? Is that happening around the country, and where do you see it 5 years from now? Because it's definitely a need.
So thank you, Catherine. I appreciate the kind remarks. So Catherine's question is there a national trend towards offering life skills to student athletes? This is what I see. We have a couple of forces. One, with this cost of attendance, now we can start to kind of pay student athletes. Not necessarily compensation, because we don't want to go down that path, right? Because they're still student athletes, and that's a whole other talk, different talk. They're student athletes, but we do consume the overwhelming majority of their lives during their seasons so we can see them on Saturdays. Anyway, on the life skills question, I think universities are doing a decent job at offering sort of ad hoc programs. So this is what usually happens. During training camp, you bring in the guy that says, don't do drugs. Clap, 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 he leaves. Next day, you bring in the gal that says, save your money. Clap, clap, clap. And you have this carousel of one-off talks, and you say, well, listen. That way, when the statesman comes to you and says, well, I cannot believe you haven't discussed, we had someone from the National Domestic Violence Hotline come in on August the 13th, and he gave this presentation. I'm really fortunate to be in a place like Texas where we have this 3-hour course. I think it needs to be embedded in the academic framework, right? I think it can't be a 1 hour or a one-off talk. It needs to be a course where you look at these issues from a myriad of different vantage points. I haven't seen that development on the national landscape. I think we're getting close, but I think it needs to be in the curriculum and it needs to be an academic endeavor. Question? Yeah. Yes, sir.
David Flotis, MBA student here in McCombs. I guess kind of shifting topics a little bit. How often do you see, I hear a lot of coaches talking about kind of the process, probably more so collegiately, but it's talking about the process of change. I know Shaka Smart, Charlie Strong, those guys have talked about it. How does that factor into sort of change management when you're coming in a new team that's 0-16 and talking about that process and staying on track, even though there's a lot of noise kind of in the outside world to maybe change tracks or do something different?
Yeah. I think the process, especially at the NFL level, it's very nuanced. And you're now starting to see head coaches spend time at the Goldmans and spend time with the McKinseys in the offseason, because I think for head coaches, especially as that generation gets younger, the Chip Kellys start to come in and your Belichick's and those, that cohort of coaches starts to move out. I think that coaches are looking to the outside to say, how can we get smarter at what we do? And the one thing about athletics is that coaches probably spend too much time on process. I mean, if you think about it, every team that I coached with, when I walked onto the field on August 1st for training camp, I knew where I needed to be for the next 6 months. I had a schedule. Hey, this is practice. This is the meeting time. This is the time we're going to get on the plane. I mean, that was all scripted for 6 months, right? I think that we've relied too much on process a little bit in the sports world and less on people, because at the NFL level, coaches are really afraid to get too invested in players just because the turnover is so high. Whereas with the college scene, I sat on mama's couch and I told her that I was going to make sure that you went to chemistry, right? So I've got some skin in the game. And if you don't make the grades and you don't play, the position coach at the end of the day is going to be the one who's at fault. So I appreciate your time. I hope you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.